By carefully reading similar articles provided by the media on the origin of the COVID-19 virus, we can see a clear tendency that while such articles try to avoid conclusively affirming that the virus came from a laboratory, they often imply that the Wuhan lab leak theory is a mainstream view. So why are false theories taking root and growing? Let's turn to an expert on this.
But probably the most important bias that exists is as a result of journalists' need to have an audience for what they're trying to convey. And so this is just kind of survival bias in a sense, in an era where journalists are under a lot of pressure. Mainstream news outlets are in a much more competitive environment. A lot of outlets are shutting their doors or cutting staff. It's more important than at any other point in time.
If it bleeds, it leads is an old news tenet. It means the more dramatic the headline, the bigger the audience. But science and scientists' judgments are by their very nature serious, sometimes even mind-numbing, and often fail to capture the psychology or imagination of the modern, distracted audience of today.
But a lot of people get frustrated by that. They want clear and compelling answers immediately, right away. And for good reason, because they want to be able to structure their lives. They want to know how to best protect themselves. But unfortunately, the scientific process is slow, cumulative, and sometimes there are contradictory findings, and that's just the way it is. And so COVID-19 specifically has thrown a lot of other complications into science communication.
Those sound bites that speak about paranoia, conspiracy, are ones that have outweighed the messaging from the public health community about protection and safety. And what we saw with this particular pandemic was not a scientific failure, but a political failure. We saw the failure of leadership. But remarkably, what we saw was sort of an uneven distribution of that failure. We saw, certainly within the West, within Europe, and within North America, absolute failure of leadership.
There's been a diminishing of respect for science, but at least here, I think scientists have felt very targeted as not that useful, and so that people are listening and trusting us again. And then again, we need to really break down the walls within our government, between agencies, but also between and among governments all over the world.
Initially, in the early stages of the pandemic, there was a desire for Trump to kind of off responsibility onto China. And so that Republican leaders and Trump pushed that linkage as much as possible in order to evade responsibility. And allies in the media kind of carried out that messaging faithfully, as you would expect given their political leanings. And so that did lend this whole issue an ideological charge that it probably shouldn't have, because ultimately, whatever the origins of COVID-19 has not a whole lot of bearing in terms of how we deal with it right now.
This is a time for science and solidarity. Wild conspiracy theories are infecting the internet. Hatred is going viral, stigmatizing and vilifying people and groups. The world must unite against this disease too. And the vaccine is trust. First, trust in science. And I salute the journalists and others fact-checking the mountain of misleading stories and social media posts.